What's going on, everybody? My name is Ian and you're watching the Drive MX5 channel, and today we're going to try to fix the power steering leak in my 1996 Mazda Miata. Now before we start, we're going to want to put some gloves on. I'm not sure if power steering fluid is toxic when it comes in contact with the skin, but we definitely don't want it all over our hands. So make sure you get some good nitrile gloves before you start this job. So as you can see, there is a ton of fluid here on the hood. Now I originally thought it was engine oil, but it turns out that the leak was coming from here, the power steering fluid area. You got your pump here on top, your reservoir right here, and this is the high pressure hose. In my case, this is the part that's leaking. And this actually happened on the tail of the Dragon. So I was pushing the car extra hard, doing a lot of steering, a lot of high RPMs. So I'm sure it built up a lot of pressure in the system and the hose just eventually broke. So first step of making this repair is going to be to move this intake tube out of the way. If your car is stock, what you'll have is two hose clamps, one here, one here. They're both Phillips head screws. You just gotta loosen them up and pop the hose off. Now you'll also have a hose right here that connects to the PCV pipe, and you just need to remove this hose clamp and get the hose off so we can move the whole intake tube out of the way. Lastly, if your car has cruise control, you'll see that there's a vacuum line that runs from the intake manifold to the cruise control actuator. And this hose is normally held on by three plastic retainers here, here, and here. And you'll just have to move the hose out of the way. Mine is not, because I have replaced this with the thicker one and it doesn't fit in the retainers. So for me, it's going to be super easy. Just got to get the two hose clamps off, and then we can kind of take the whole intake tube and just lift it out of the way. You do not have to remove this vacuum hose right here. Just leave that one attached. It has enough play in it for you to move the whole intake tube out of the way. Now with the intake tube and the cruise control vacuum line out of the way, you can see we have nice access to this top nut here for the pressure hose. So this is going to be the top mounting point. We got to get this nut off. And it looks like we'll need to remove the air box. We might need to move the reservoir out of the way and a few other things, especially because we're going to try to get down there to try and get the bottom mounting point for this hose off. We're going to try to do this without lifting the car up in the air. So go ahead and remove the air box and maybe move the power steering fluid reservoir out of the way, and we'll see how much access we have. To remove the air box, you're going to have two 12mm bolts right here and right here, and then a 12mm nut right here. You're also going to have this 10mm bolt you got to move because you got to get this tube off that connects to the air box. Now to remove the power steering reservoir, you're going to have two 10mm bolts here and here. If your car has the factory cruise control module like mine does, you're also going to have to remove this 10mm bolt here and this 10mm bolt down here in order to lift the cruise control module off so we can get the air box out. You're gonna be in my YouTube video.
Hey, check out my podcast, Suplex the Sticks.
So I don't know how well you guys can see this, but the lower mount for the hose is right, let me get the light focused, right down there. So it's actually accessible. Once we can move the reservoir out of the way to kind of get these hoses here out of the way, and then we should have access to the nut down there. The top one is real easy right here. It's just a 19, and then there's this 12mm bolt holding the bracket that's holding the hose. So you gotta get this 12mm bolt off, and you need a 19mm box end wrench or something that'll fit on this nut here. Now, I actually do not have a 19mm wrench, but I do have some vice grips. So the bottom mount for the power steering hose down there is a 17 millimeter, but there's not much leverage because of these hoses that run to the reservoir. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and disconnect these to see if I can get some more room to work. I'm going to go ahead and take this hose clamp off of this top hose here, and then take the hose clamp off of this bottom hose. So I also suggest before disconnecting the hoses, go ahead and get yourself a red Solo cup or some sort of a container that you can put power steering fluid in case a bunch of it runs out of these lines once we disconnect them. It'd just be better to go ahead and collect it rather than letting it drip onto the car and then onto the ground. So down here there's also going to be a little 12 millimeter bolt that you're going to need to take off just to get that bracket right down there out of the way. That's what holds the lower portion of the power steering hose on. So go ahead and get that bolt off, and then you can move the bracket and remove the hose. So as you guys can imagine, this repair is not going nearly as smoothly as planned. What I've ended up having to do is not only remove the coolant hose, which runs from this metal pipe here to the block and spill like half my coolant. I've also had to remove this power steering hose that goes from the reservoir here on the bottom to the pump here. This hose I was going to remove, but I couldn't get this off without destroying it, so I've just left it where it is and had to move this, accordingly depending on if the hose is in the way or not. So 2 tips on trying to do this repair. Number 1, pray that you never have to. Number 2, make sure you have a line wrench to get this bottom connector off. So here's the box end wrench that I was originally trying to use, and not only is the head a lot bigger than the line wrench, which made it really difficult because the access is very poor, but also, as I was saying, you kind of get the wrench on here, but it didn't really fit great, and it would tend to jump teeth and literally move, let's say, from here to here without actually turning this piece. That was the problem. So make sure you get yourself a good line wrench. It's a 17 millimeter, and you'll just need to fit it on like that, and it grips the head a lot better. I also had to end up taking another wrench and placing it on the end kind of like that and using that for extra leverage. That's why I needed to remove the coolant hose there, and also this little mounting plate for the air box. So this is just 2 10 millimeter bolts, super easy. Coolant hose was a little bit more of a pain. So hopefully your hose, if you have to replace the power steering hose, it won't be as difficult as this one. Hopefully you'll be able to remove it a little bit easier. But if you do, just make sure you take these steps. Get more gloves because mine ripped and I ran out. And just make sure you're prepared. You have coolant and power steering fluid, box end, line wrenches, just any tools that you may need, and lots of paper towels to clean up afterwards, because this does get very messy very fast. Now that the old hose is off, I can go ahead and work on getting the new hose back in place. Hopefully this one goes in a little bit easier than the old one. Alright guys, so we just got the new pressurized power steering hose back in. Got the coolant hose back on. So the next step now would be to get all the airbox pieces back together, and then we got to bleed not only the cooling system but the power steering system as well. So to bleed the power steering system, we're actually going to use this little rubber plug that came with the kit. This will fit into the return line of the power steering pump. But before we do that, we need to bleed the cooling system, and that would just include taking the radiator cap off, allowing any air to escape, putting the heater on full blast, so that way you got the coolant running through the heater core as well to get any air bubbles out that might be trapped there. So once you do those 2 things and you get the engine up to operating temperature, and you just fill up the radiator until the level stops dropping, and then you'll fill the reservoir up to about the midpoint, and you should be good to go. So we're going to go ahead and get the airbox pieces back on, and then get to bleeding the cooling and the power steering systems. Just a quick pro tip for you guys. So when I was putting the airbox back in, of course the plug that I was going to use for the power steering pump, the little yellow piece, fell out, went down there somewhere, and Well, now I have no clue. Actually, there it is. No, that's not it. That is the ground. So make sure you don't put that plug in before you put everything else back together. Make sure you get everything else back together. You get the air box, the tube, everything how it should be, and only put the plug in once you're ready to start bleeding the system. I forgot to film the bleeding of the power steering system, but that basically consisted of removing this lower half of the air box here so I could have room to fit a cup down here and catch any fluid that came out of the return hose. Basically just start the car with that hose disconnected and covering the pipe that leads into the power steering pump, and then I have my roommate turn the wheel all the way left and all the way right to get the fluid moving through the system, get any air bubbles that were trapped. And basically once clean fluid was coming out of the hose, which did not take very long, you just put the hose back on and then make sure to top off the reservoir, make sure the levels are okay, and that should be good to go. Just got back from the test drive, ran great. Didn't have any issues leaking or overheating, so I think that the problem is solved. So a couple of things I learned from doing this and a few other repairs is the first, make sure you have the right tools for the job. That means all fluids, drain pans, wrenches, anything you need or think you might need to do the job. Just go ahead and get it, have it on hand, that way you don't have to make a bunch of trips out to the store. As you can see, I didn't really use a drain pan to drain the coolant, which was a big mistake. So they're really cheap, they really are. I was just lazy and cheap by not buying one, but they just cost a few bucks at Walmart or whatever. So make sure you go ahead and get one or two. So anytime you need to drain some fluid, it's just right there and you're not having to find a Gatorade bottle or something like that lying around the house. So make sure you have the right tools, the right equipment, and never be afraid to find help from other people as well. I know I had to have some help from other people to do this job. So I want to thank you all so much for watching. I hope this helps in some way, shape, or form. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to keep up with all the latest stuff that I post. And I can't wait to see you in the next video.